Welcome into UGA Football Live with JC Shelton, where the dogs come to talk. All right, guys, welcome in UGA Football Live with JC Shelton. Got a big week here, Georgia, Tennessee on the way. Joined here by my partner this season. Always love having him on, and I hope you guys do as well. Arthur Lynch, former Georgia tight end, barber, history man. He does it all, folks, and he knows what he's talking about too. So how you doing, Artie?
I'm good, JC. Enjoyed our live show yesterday talking about the college football playoff, but excited to do the main show here today and kind of just talk about last week and one of the best rivalries in college sports. I think Georgia Tennessee, underrated one in the grand scheme of things.
Underrated. They haven't played as long as your other SEC rivals, right? So I think that maybe what kind of leads into that, I guess, especially for the older folks in the Georgia fan base. But I think you're right. And there's a lot. You meet some Tennessee fans, man, and listen. There's a lot of Georgia fans that can be the types of fans you don't want to run into, but Tennessee fans, I think they've got a beating. But anyway, yeah, if you already mentioned it there, if you missed our live show yesterday, it was a late one, so I don't blame you. But it is on our YouTube channel, Pulse Sports Network. You can find it there in the lives tab on our channel. Talked a little bit CFP rankings. We gave our reactions there and really talked more of the national scene. So if you want that side from us, at least, that's where you can find that. We're doing that each week. But now, Georgia, Tennessee, we're going to talk about this Ole Miss game that really, vaulted Georgia into that top spot in the CFP rankings. Speaking of college football playoff, jumps Ohio State after Ohio State. The Buckeyes are number one for 2 weeks in a row. Georgia did enough to the committee to get that number one spot. And I expected it, and I think most nationally, at least, people expected that to happen as well. I haven't seen many people oppose that. And I know Artie agrees that they made the right move, even though you can say they don't matter. And I'm sure we'll have that in the comments. But it at least it has, like I said yesterday, it's nice to see that little number one next to your name.
No.
Yes, sir. But everything obviously will work itself out. And, we look back to this before Georgia played Missouri and had Ole Miss, coming up, had Tennessee coming up. Everybody was like, oh, they stretch. We're going to see if Georgia's about it or they're not. They're going to be number one after all of this, or they're probably going to be out of the playoff entirely. It's 2 straight weeks. Georgia showed up, played really well. One of those games was without Brock Bowers, still beat Missouri by 9. And then Ole Miss 52-17. Brock Bowers comes back. What a beautiful sight that was. It was a great scene. And you could tell there was a different energy, at least to me, already in this game for that reason, because you can expand on this a little bit more for somebody who hadn't seen the last show that you did when we talked about Brock Bowers and from your perspective, how he could maybe provide a little spark to a team that didn't necessarily need it the way they were playing, but it's always good to have.
Yeah, I mean, talk about the word juice, right? It can be overused, but man, I think he just brings a little bit different, a little extra juice to the offense, right? Obviously, his talent speaks for itself, I should say. But last week I talked about there's a few players who are exceptional, and typically those guys end up being first round picks, right? But just their level of play, their natural talent, their competitive spirit, and just their tenacity on the football field, it's infectious. And they have like a unique ability to affect other people around them to also heighten their game. And, I think last week, I think we've talked about it on 2 separate occasions about Brock, but just, Roquan Smith, Jarvis Jones, AJ Green, Todd Gurley, right? These are guys, Nick Chubb, like obviously these guys are all, end up being great pros, right? And have exceptional talent and are first round picks. But they all have one thing in common, and that's they raise the level of play around the other guys around them. And when they are absent, there's a noticeable difference, right? Case in point, AJ Green suspended for 4 games, right? In that 2010 season, that really hurt us because it's it's almost like losing a get out of jail free card in Monopoly, right? Like 3rd and 8, you need a pinch. Who are you going to, AJ? When you miss that guy, some guys may step up, some guys may not. Luckily, in Brock's absence, we didn't miss a beat, which says a lot about our coaches and the players who stepped up. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think there was an extra spark in the offense. There was a little bit extra juice, if you will, in the stadium. And it's you and I talked offline about just like the recovery timeline. Like, modern medicine is just insane.
Man,
It's
I mean,
like
it almost
it's
reminds me
insane,
of what we're about to see from Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron's probably going to come back mid-December from a torn
which is
Achilles at
insane.
39, I think he is, or something like
Yeah,
that. That's incredible. And that kind of makes me think of what Brock did, because I wrote this too after the game. I was like, you had Amarius Mims and Lawson Lucky go through the same procedure this year, right? And they both came back weeks after. Amarius came back with Brock, and he suffered that injury in week 3. Brock suffered that in week 7, right? And Lawson was a little bit different. Freshman, obviously, wasn't going to get a lot of playing time to begin with. So they were even more cautious with him, I think. Well, totally understand that. But I'm just using that as a reference for what we saw, because it was incredible. And he started and he played well. It wasn't like he just got a few snaps and what have you. And I think here's my little take too. I think Kirby Smart created that juice too last week.
yeah.
I think he knew that Brock was going to come back because of what we already had, Marcus Rosemy-Jackson, the receiver, we talked about it last week, said, hell, he's been hitting 19 and 20 miles an hour in practice. Kirby wasn't going to give us anything early in the week. And then all of a sudden, Pat McAfee show on Friday, he's like, maybe we'll see. It could be real interesting. And that's paraphrased, but basically he did say it may be real interesting. And I'm like, Kirby never says stuff like that. So that's why I wrote it immediately. I was like, okay, this is something. And then of course he does what he does on Saturday. So I think he might have.
Kirby's a calculated dude, right?
Yes.
Like that dude, I don't know him personally. I've never met him. I am a fan of his from a distance, obviously, but he's got the control freak mentality of Saban. So every word that comes out of his mouth, every decision he makes is with a purpose.
Yeah.
And so
And
I don't mistake his words is what you're saying, and I agree with you.
Yeah, I'm with you. And even last night, and we're kind of getting off topic, but I think it's interesting. Even last night,
you're good.
After the Bloody Tuesday practice, which we all know about now. If you follow enough Georgia football, that's what they call their Tuesday practices. They're in full pads. It's a full go. Not a lot of programs do that. Kirby Smart, that Georgia staff, maintain that, and they say the players are hyped up. They get the players hyped up for it. It really builds physicality for them.
Mm-hmm.
He was so pissed last night after that practice and said it was one of the worst practices they had this year. And Tuesdays, they said after 5 straight, they had a bad one. He said, I don't know if they're getting full of themselves or what. And he was just pissed the entire conference, rubbing his eyes during answers and stuff like that. I was like, he's doing it on purpose. He doesn't want these guys to get full of themselves, quote, like he said.
Oh, dude, no doubt, 100%.
Yeah. But back to Ole Miss here, right? Offensive domination, obviously, you got 52 points on the board, 25 first downs, 5 of 8, only 8 third down attempts for Georgia. And there were 5 of 8 on them. That speaks for itself. 611 total yards, 311 passing. That's 12 per pass. That's 300 rushing, 8.6 yards per carry. And the biggest thing we should realize, and we talked about this already, I brought up the stats with the sacks. Ole Miss getting after the quarterback, second team in the SEC in sacks. Carson Beck did not get touched once. Not touched.
That offensive line.
Not just not sacked, not touched. And we have Amarius Mims back in there, but can't credit it all on one guy. Even though he's great, he'll be probably a first-round pick right in the spring. That was an incredible performance by that pass protection unit for Georgia. I mean, how good is that, seeing that moving up? Because, I mean, Alabama will get after the court. We don't know what Alabama does, but they're kind of like Georgia. The sack numbers really don't stand out as much as their just physicality and then controlling their gap, integrity, and stuff like that on the defensive line. But I was really impressed by that.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Look, this offensive line was supposed to be the kind of the pillars of the offense, along with Brock Bowers at the beginning of the year. And I think some people were a little bit frustrated. You and I kind of were like, let's pump the brakes and calm down for a bit. But I think, like we discussed last night, right, the great teams mature and grow week in and week out. And the interesting thing about offensive line, offensive linemen, more than any other position in sports, is it's five guys seen as a unit, right? So it's a team within a team, right? You ask Ben Jones, you ask David Andrews, you ask John Theus, any of those guys like that played the game, or the current players, obviously, like it is a team within a team. There's like almost like a sixth sense that gets built amongst those guys over the course of the season. And I can't even speak to it 100% because I wasn't in an offensive line, but I worked enough with them, right, as a primarily a blocking tight end, as you know, as we've discussed ad nauseum here on this podcast. But I do think that's super important to like highlight, right? Is as this team has grown, like as close as it's grown as an overall team, offense, defense, special teams, like the exponential growth that takes place within that offensive line unit is like a 10x when you're comparing it to the overall team. And it's really cool to like, it's cool to watch, right? Because again, I wasn't an offensive lineman, but to see those guys bond, grow, and have confidence in one another, and that talks about, we're talking about communication, right? If it's like if they're doing like a specific double team on a three technique up to the outside backer, it's like they get to a point where they don't even need to call out the calls, right? They'll just do like a quick tap, or they'll just know, right? And it's just that kind of sixth sense and that kind of peripheral vision that they start developing amongst themselves as a unit. And I think we're starting to see that. Unfortunately, we're starting to see it at Alabama too. But for us, because this is a Georgia football podcast, that is super encouraging. And I'm glad you brought it up because like that confidence that gets built in that unit, that growth that they see in that unit, Carson Beck sees that, right? And he's an annexation of that family. Like those guys, it's kind of interesting, right? You talk about like a bear, like a mama bear and her cubs. It's like the opposite. It's like five mama bears and then one cub. You know what I mean? That one cub being the quarterback.
Dude.
And so it's cool to see like those five guys, like the holy grail is Carson Beck. Like, you know what I mean? And that's how they treat him. And so it's I'm excited to see it. And you can kind of, that's one thing I've been noticing the past couple of weeks. Like, oh, those dudes, they trust Carson. Carson trusts them. And if Carson does fall on the ground or get bumped, watch the reaction of those offensive linemen. They're first going to hold themselves accountable, and then they're going to go get after somebody's ass who just hit their quarterback.
Yeah. Anybody listening to this, JC Shelton _ on Twitter, send me an AI. Get AI, ask AI to do a picture of Carson Beck as a mama cub and the offensive lineman as little cubs. Send it. I'll post it. I'll tag you.
No, it's the other way. It's five mama cubs and one baby cub. You got to protect the baby cub, dude.
5 mama cubs might be. And Carson Beck is a little cub in a little basket or something.
I don't mean that in a negative way, Carson, if you watch this. I'm saying that your boy's got your back. That's all I'm saying.
We get it. And speaking of Beck, 18 to 25, 306, just efficient.
Yep.
2 touchdowns, did have that pick. Doesn't throw many. Brett Thorson punted 1 time. Career game for Kendall Milton on senior night, which is the great thing for him as a guy who's battled back from injuries, so many injuries, and has maintained that status as that team guy, that leader in the running back room, the guy who's going to play. If he's hurt, he's going to try and play. Just consistently one of my favorite guys to watch and listen to. He has that mindset, it's pretty rare, but I feel like a lot of these Georgia guys have it. And that, again, coaching, right? 9 carries, 127, 9 carries, 2 touchdowns. Dejon Edwards, 2 touchdowns. Andrew Paul, who tore his ACL in camp last year. He got his first touchdown as a Bulldog. Ladd McConkey, again, leading the team and catches 4, 81 yards. Biggest storyline of the game, obviously, Brock Bowers coming back. We've talked about that. 3 catches, 34 yards, a touchdown, and you could hear the reaction in that stadium from Brock getting back. And Brock said in his post game that it kind of felt different, once he got out on the field. He's like, "Oh, this is special. Like I'm back in Sanford, and who knows? It's likely that's his last time in Sanford, but we'll never know until he announces. But something to consider. And I think it was one of the best endings you could have had as a Georgia fan is watching that man who's going to go down as a Georgia legend, probably one of the best players of all time, right there with Herschel and Nick Chubb and such.
100%.
And you're not going to really, I don't think, feel that until he's gone for a while and be like, man, that number 19, remember him? So happy for him, and I'm glad to have him back. If you're a Georgia fan, I'm sure you are, and you should be. The differences, we talk about the sacks allowed, stuff like that, how much of Brock Bowers being back helped in those areas in the run game, and then allowing, the sacks not happening. So something to consider. Defensively, SEC's third best offense, right? Gained 352, 173 passing, 7.2 yards per, 179 rushing. That was 4 yards a carry. Once again, we saw the Dogs already, they give up some early plays. And when I was watching this, I can't remember who I told, but I was like, when Ole Miss went down and scored, I was like, hey, we allowed first touchdowns to several teams this year, and we came out and blew them out. I was like, I think somebody was a little worried. It was next to me. I was like, hey, it's all good. Let's see what this offense does. The defense usually is going to make adjustments, lock up. That first drive, is one of the hardest to defend just because, teams have a week, sometimes 2 weeks to prepare and scheme up that first drive. Then you have to respond. But they came back and locked down. I mean, Javon Bullard, interception. CJ Allen at linebacker stepping in there for Jamon Dumas-Johnson, Pop Johnson. Man, you really couldn't tell that Jamon was not in there. I don't know how on the field difference it was from not having your leader, your captain, in that one, because they split play calls defensively. Smael Mondon and then Pop Johnson will have both sides of the field calling the keys, right? That's what Kirby said. Was that CJ Allen this game? I'm not sure, but he played incredible. 9 tackles, sack, tackle for loss as a true freshman. That's pretty scary for opposing defenses. I mean, when you think about that talent in that linebacker room, when we'll get Pop back, we're not sure. Kirby shared nothing. He just says he's hopeful. So maybe that means that he'll be back before the postseason. Kamari Lassiter finished with 5 tackles, pass breakup. He has been really good this year. Locked down. He is that number one guy. Not even individual matchups, like guys like Luther Burden and such, they haven't been able to get much on Kamari. So I think he's one of those guys you can leave on an island. On the other spot, already is at cornerback is Dalen Everett and Julian Humphrey. And Julian Humphrey went down with that shoulder injury. And it sounds like, at least to me, from the hearing report and Kirby's talk about it, had to be like an AC, like an AC joint thing, separations, maybe a dislocation, something like that. Says going to miss extended time. So who knows, when that will be. We'll get him back. But that does hurt your depth a little bit because they've been rotating. Julian Humphrey's got a lot more snaps recently with Dalen Everett. So when you're playing those bigger passing teams, which in Georgia doesn't have one on the schedule, even Alabama, I mean, they're going to run the ball, but deep shots, Alabama, that's what they're good at, but they're not going to line up and pass every play. And I think the big takeaways for me, Artie, is this: we're at the point in the season where the pretenders are being revealed, and I think we'll see that in the next couple of weeks, especially in the top. And we talked a lot about that last night in the CFP show. Georgia has proved itself over the last 2 weeks is the best team in the country. And another team that's doing the same thing, we talked about it too, Alabama. Who would have thought Nick Saban and Kirby Smart's teams were playing the best football at this point in the season, right? And then I think my other takeaway is just offensively and defensively, when you look at balance, and that's huge for me when considering who's going to go to the title game, who's going to win these games in big-time situations and the pressure situations. Balance. Georgia's the only team in the country that's top 10 in both offense and defense. 9th in total defense, 5th in total offense. And already the addition of Brock Bowers into this, it proved to be the jump start, I think. And then how does this team come out from a big win like this under the Sanford lights in your experience and have to get ready for an SEC game on the road in an environment like
what is going on?
That was beautiful. It's your birthday already. You want to sing happy birthday?
What is going on?
I don't know what that was, man. If you're listening, this already just had balloons come up on his screen.
You
He
guys
really
got me
liked what I
blushing
said.
on here.
Yeah.
I did like what you said. It's a great question about Tennessee. Look, at the end of the day, right, we're talking about playing in Knoxville. We're talking about I have such a distinct memory of my first time in Knoxville, 2009. Um, Luke Stocker was a tight end. Eric Berry was the safety. I think it was an Ainge, maybe an Ainge, could be a Clausen, one of those. Someone from that family was a
Was it
QB.
Danny Ainge?
It may have Eric Ainge, I think was his name.
Okay.
Long story short, it was the infamous year of Lane Kiffin. We lost that game. My roommate my freshman year was Marlon Brown. Marlon, if those of you who don't remember his backstory, Memphis, Tennessee, a 5-star recruit, basketball, football, top 15 recruit in the country, chose Georgia over Tennessee. And you know, I'll never forget, it was like a fourth game of the year. And I'll never forget, as long as I live, Marlon caught his first career pass in college in that game, and 110,000 people were booing this kid, right? Like, because he caught it, you know what I mean? And you're just like, and Marlon was just the type of dude you just brush it off. But what I'm saying is, like, it might be something in the water in Tennessee River. It could be, something that's going on in the Smoky Mountains. I don't know. I don't want to be too presumptuous in my judgment of East Tennessee folk, but I will say this: it's a different place to play, man. We had a couple battles there. We had a couple times we won pretty big, but we also had a couple battles in 2013. People remember that pile on, the fumble and double overtime. We ended up winning by a field goal. The last time we went there in 21, Tennessee started out okay. I think that was Heupel's first year, and then they blew them out. I think it was like 41-14 or something, right? So we just had a big win, but I haven't seen the trend of letdowns in the Kirby Smart era, right? The only letdowns they've had are against like far inferior opponents at that point in time, right? Like the South Carolina loss at home, or that kind of Missouri game last year where it was close. But like when it is a rivalry game and that rival is even somewhat competitive, Kirby gets up for the game and he gets his boys up for the game. And Tennessee is 7-3, right? They were 10-2 last year. They are a much better program than what they were the previous 5 years, right? So what I think Kirby is selling his guys right now is like, just because this team being this Tennessee team has not lived up to their preseason hype doesn't mean that they can't be dangerous. So I am not as worried for this game as I probably was 6-7 weeks ago, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think me being a little bit more involved with Tennessee and doing some work covering them for the Players Lounge did get maybe a better look at them early in the season and knowing their progression, and then the mishaps and miscues, injury issues, penalty issues, stuff like that. So made me think that, Missouri and Ole Miss were going to be those big ones for us. Now, I don't think you can discount the fact that Tennessee has a chance to make a huge statement, not only in recruiting, but also for their program. And this season, which has been a letdown after having basically a Cinderella perfect storm year last year with some really good players who they lost. And it's completely changed their team, really. I mean, their defense has improved, but offensively, that's their issues. When you look at last year, I mean, they were the best offense in the country. And you talked about a little bit there, but our last three trips to Neyland, 41-0 in 2017, 2 years later, 43-14, and then 2 years later, 41-17. So kind of the stigma in playing in Neyland Stadium, I think, is very prevalent for just about everybody else except Georgia, or it has been. That's what we've seen on Kirby Smart.
But Georgia's just we've had their number though for like a long time, and that extends well beyond Kirby, right? Mark Richt had a great record against Tennessee, and the hot nail boot, that was the game that was my introduction, or like play on words, my history class to the Tennessee rivalry, right? And I just think that Georgia always gets up for this game, particularly in Knoxville. Ironically, I think Tennessee always plays us better when they play in Athens. And I just think historically that we are not as affected by Neyland, like you said, like the 90% of the other teams that played it.
Yeah, and I think Kirby Smart and that coaching staff and their mentality has just moved its way down to the players. And good coaching obviously does that. I think me and you both agree. And just from listening to the players, at least this week, talk about it, they're excited to play there. They're excited to play in a rowdy, us against the world kind of environment, which it so much is there. With the rowdy fan base, how many people and how loud it gets. So that's why I expect Georgia to play well, and I think history tells us that. But by the numbers real quick here. So Georgia's 10-point favorite. We got a total at 58.5. So last week was 10.5 Georgia, and it was like 56.5. So a little different here, but not much. Explosive play rates. This is my first point here. Georgia heavily, heavily favored right there in explosive pass rates. Beck is top 10 in 20, 30, and 40-yard passing plays. Tennessee defense is 62nd, 53rd, and 42nd against those. Now, run defense, that's where they excel. That defensive line for Tennessee has played really well this year. Probably the best out of anybody besides the running back room on that team. They love to get after the quarterback, tackles for loss, havoc plays like that, force fumbles. That's what they're looking at, right? But the pass defense hasn't been there. Tennessee scoring on offense 32 points per game. Georgia's at 40.6. UGA allowing 15.6 per game. That's sixth in the country. UT allowing 20.2, 30th. It's not bad. Tennessee ranked 70th and giving up 228 passing yards per game. So that's where that pass defense. And if you look at the Georgia offense, I mean, we've been slightly passing the ball more. Interested to see what Georgia will do, especially coming off a big game in the run game. I think they utilize that heavily on the road here, quiet that crowd a little bit, put on some long drives. Like I said, UT running game, that's their offense, man. Joe Milton, you look at him, he's athletic, huge arm, all the preseason hype. He's not a developed passer, all right? He's not going to sit in that pocket long. When he does, he's going to run. Now, he is athletic enough when he runs to take off. I mean, he's an athletic kid. Props to him. Struggles against good secondaries, right? And that's when they have to even rely heavily on the run game even more. And like we said, already balance is the key here to beat Georgia. Mm-hmm. They don't have it. Defensively, who knows what they can do? The tide can turn so quickly in these SEC games, and you obviously know that better than any of us. But I think couple that with how unbalanced they are with penalties, and it's crazy, Artie, you might like this one. They're 130th out of 133 FBS teams in penalties at home. So even their own crowd or environment, who knows what it is, but they're averaging 9 penalties at home in Neyland Stadium, and Georgia's one of the least penalized teams in the country. And we saw that against Ole Miss, Missouri. They're all almost double the penalties Georgia has, and you can't beat the number one team rolling like they are, penalizing yourself like that. And the last thing I'll say, I know it's a lot at once, is
no, you're good.
They have 2 of their top 4 receivers are out for the season. They just lost another one. Squirrel White is the go-to, and he was leading before that. He is the go-to, and he's even more the number one guy now. Ramel Keaton, that's a guy to look at second-wise, but I think they just don't have the weapons on offense. I think it's less on Joe Milton than some people put on, and it's more on having the receivers create space and really threatening the defense to make you cover them. Georgia's going to be able to play up. They're going to play in the box. Man, they're going to run key all get out against this Tennessee offense because that's what they're going to do. And Georgia's comfortable with letting that secondary just playing, right? And I think that would be the smart move. What do you think as far as that goes on? What do you expect, I guess, from Georgia in this Tennessee team schematically a bit on offense?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, defense. I know you asked about offense for Georgia. I think defensively, we're going to challenge Joe Milton early and often, right? I think if we're just judging football players like prom dates, meaning how do they look, Joe Milton, that's the best in the business. But ultimately, you got to be able to perform. You got to be a fluid athlete, no matter how athletic you look. And Skelly, how fluid are you on when the whistle blows and you're in full pads? And I think Georgia's defense will be able to put some pressure on him. I think offensively, we talked about him a little bit because of senior night is Milton, right? And you and I started talking about him and saying when he gets back and he gets going around the Florida game, he's going to play a big part of this Georgia offense moving forward because Georgia has always either had running back by committee or a stud running back. And I think what we're seeing right now is it's become more of a running back by committee, but we're starting to gain those yards, right? And I think with Carson Beck's confidence, with the offensive line's confidence, and now with the backs growing confidence in their own abilities, I think we're going to run the ball a lot, settle down the crowd. And then once we kind of soften up that defense, which, like you said, has improved in comparison to last year, we're going to start throwing the ball over the top, right? And I think we could do predictions later. I think Georgia matches up well, but I do think when you're looking at Tennessee and we talk about lack of weapons, clearly, this is year 3 of like a stripped down rebuild, right? And I think Heupel, to his credit, is probably like 2 years ahead of schedule, right? I think last year he was like 4 years ahead of schedule. I think they got really lucky with the quarterback and they developed him correctly. I don't know what's going on with my my
if,
Zoom.
if you're just
Uh,
listening to this, Artie just had a thumb, like a emoji thumb in a bubble pop up, and he really
uh,
likes my take on this Georgia
yeah, I
team.
do. I do. I do. I love it. But I don't know. I just think that and again, I'm not making excuses for him, but what was his name? The old head coach. I'm blanking on him. Pruitt.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
Pruitt left a dumpster fire, and one thing we talked about Allen, the linebacker, coming in having a game like that is there's 2 explanations for that. That is recruiting talent and then developing talent, and that is the coaching staff's ability to do both. And I think Heupel is probably got to Tennessee. It was like the cabinets are pretty bare. It's like we got to put this thing together. So I am actually a believer in Heupel. I wasn't a believer in his ability to put a defense on the field. He proved me wrong this year. But to your point, I don't think they got the depth and they definitely don't have the QB this year to like pull off the upset that I know would make their season, and be the
yeah.
signature win for them.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And they do have, they lose those guys, right? They lose Hendon Hooker and Jalen Highland and Cedric Tillman. And who do you have to come up after that? It was developed enough to really play well and kind of at least help in maintaining the production from last year, which was really crazy to do because they were the number 1 offense in the country. Defensively, like you said, the improvements is there. And I think you keep that running for Tennessee. They have a 5-star waiting in their wings who I'm not going to mess up his name. It's like Lemavoa or something like that. Like the number 1, number 2 passer in the country, this past recruiting class. So I think they have some bright spots there maybe in the future, but I don't think this is their year. Something to watch, Georgia fans, when you're watching the game, and I'm going to be key on it with me if you want. First, second down for this Georgia defense. Can you stop the run early, right? Because this Tennessee offense and it's still Heupel's offense. They just run the ball. So they're still hurry up, right? They're going to snap it really quick. The pace is really quick. They get that first down, they're off and running. And Georgia did a really good job of this last year and playing really well first and second downs, forcing them to third, forcing them to slow down. Georgia can sub, Georgia can get their keys, and you can look at the coaching staff on the side and find out, make sure they know what they're doing. So Georgia's able to do that early and let that offense go off and do what it's been doing, and then you're good and you're going into Georgia Tech next week. So I think it's a good prediction time for us already, and we'll get to history class right after. I like 41-13. So I'm comfortable with it. I think this Georgia offense is just too tough to slow down. Might be close first quarter, bleed into that second, even like Ole Miss, right? But then Georgia takes off to me. Tennessee's offense, for the reasons I said, I don't think they have the guys to really put a lot of points up on the board. Even look at that game against Alabama they played where I think they were tied at halftime. Then Alabama scores like 27 unanswered, 23 unanswered points.
Yeah.
And that offense just stalls for Tennessee. Something similar to me here. And I think that under hits a 58.5. Artie, what say you?
Yeah, I like that too. I think we're looking at like a 44-10 game, right? 58 points a lot. and I am not a betting man, believe it or not. But I just, yeah, look, I just think it's a bad matchup for Tennessee, right? I mean, if you look at like what Georgia's like an elite version of Missouri, in my opinion, right? Like I think got a lot of weapons offensively, has a good strong defense, obviously a better defense than Missouri. What the point I'm making is Missouri handled Tennessee last week, right? They really did. It was close for a little bit there in the beginning, but so you could argue that the scoreboard doesn't reflect how that game was, but I beg to differ. I think that Missouri made huge plays on defense to just blow that game wide open, and that's what good teams do. And Georgia's not a good team; it's a great team. So I think Kirby, Muschamp, and Schumann are going to be challenging Milton early and often, right? And I like Milton. He seems like a great guy, but I don't. He's not Hendon Hooker, and Hendon Hooker didn't fare well last year against the Dogs. So
Hmm.
I think I like Georgia about, let's go 44-10, right?
Yeah.
We'll take the under, but I think it's going to be particularly close, like in the first half, right? Maybe Tennessee gets a scripted touchdown or field goal early, but I think it gets blown open pretty quick shortly after that.
Yep. Yeah, we're in agreement. And Missouri, man, good for them. We talked about it last night too, but yeah, that was a good team that Georgia played in Sanford. We all
No
know that. And
doubt.
the numbers told us that. We talked about it. And then that Schrader kid followed that good game for Georgia, and it just, ooh, man, he had
Did you
100
see
yards
the
receiving, 200 rush.
did you see the graphic on TV about like the company in which he was in for having 200 yards rushing and 100 yards? It was like a who's who of dudes, like Dexter McCluster from Ole Miss. I think Percy Harvin was up there. I mean, it was insane, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this he's a talent. He is
Yeah.
a talent,
He could be an NFL back when he can receive and run like that.
hundred
So that was
percent,
impressive
hundred
by
percent."
me. Let's get into history class with Artie Lynch here. Guys, if your first time watching or listening, none other than historian major Artie Lynch hits us up with some history class in college football. Could be in the 1740s. I don't know if college football was played then. Probably not. Or it could be yesterday. So we don't know, but we're going to find out.
Lacrosse. Fun fact: lacrosse was a sport in the 1740s. It was originally founded by the Native Americans here in the United States, popularized in the Canadian upstate New York border. The Iroquois used to play lacrosse all the time. There's a great documentary still about the Iroquois, present day with lacrosse. Neither here nor there is a football podcast, but if you guys want to DM me and talk about the history of sports, I'm all for it. I want to talk about um, basically it's a relationship between a legacy media company and the greatest college football conference there ever was, and that's the SEC on CBS. JC and I were talking about it offline. There's no specific game I want to talk. This is not there's no on this date, this happened, but rather growing up, and I always bring it back to me because I'm a lunatic. I apologize, but growing up, I just loved college football. Even though I grew up in the shadow of the New England Patriots dynasty and the Tom Brady run, I could care less. I cared less about the Patriots, but I cared everything about those sacred Saturdays. Like I wake up on 10, 9 o'clock in the morning, or wake up early, go play football outside, and then run to college game day and just sit there and watch football until Hawaii was playing at like 4 a.m. Right? That was my Saturdays. That's all I ever wanted to do was play college football. But I knew nothing about the SEC. I just didn't. Right. And then when Florida kind of had their run, I saw this big dude that people thought I looked like in Tim Tebow. So I love Tim Tebow in Florida. But before I started watching Florida a lot, I would just always tune in for the 3:30 game, right? And no matter who was playing, whether it was Arkansas, when it was Felix Jones and McFadden, or if it was when it was David Green, right? In that era of Georgia football, or the Nick Saban era of LSU, that was my first introduction to the SEC, and that all started in 2001 when the Big East, ironically enough, was partnered with CBS, and then Big East didn't renew; they renewed with ESPN, and that 3:30 kind of like CBS on or the SEC on CBS was kind of introduced to the world. And I don't know about UJC, but for me, that melody that they have is like that may as well be like the national anthem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like when that comes on, you know that you're going to see talent upon talent upon talent in a different atmosphere, in a different cultural experience because it's football in the SEC. And you don't get it anywhere else. You don't get it in the Big Ten. You don't get it in the Pac 12. You don't get it in the ACC. It's only in the SEC. And I have been all over this country. I lived in different parts of this country. I'm from New England. The SEC does it right. And the best showcase on TV of college football, in my opinion, over the past 20 plus years has been the SEC on CBS. And like anything else, money and greed ruins good things. And
TV, baby, TV.
and the SEC and the CBS are breaking up. And that 3:30 slot is now going to be like a Purdue versus Illinois game next year. And it's pretty sad. And JC and I were talking about it offline last week when I was like, hey, I'm just going to kind of do a little rundown on the SEC at CBS and just kind of go over moments in time. But you just think about how many pivotal games, particularly of our Georgia Bulldogs, have been played in that SEC championship game, or the Tennessee hot nail boot with Mark Rick and David Green when they hit the fullback Haynes, which 34-35 Haynes, I guarantee you that's still in the playbook because Bobo was there when they were running that play. That was the name of the call. Kind of a fake fullback dive over the top of the fullback, 34-35 Haynes, named after him. But it's synonymous with college football to me, that relationship, SEC, CBS, even the studio work that they do, right? Like with Rick Neuheisel and their kind of studio team in between games. They don't oversaturate us with just like, benign kind of stupid content. It's always purposeful. And I don't know, I just think that this was a staple of my childhood and adulthood and formative years as kind of a college player because we knew, like, I'm telling you, this is a thing. We knew that if we had if the times came out in the week and like we got the 3:30 slot, we knew every single person in the country was watching us. Not in the Southeast, not just New York. Every single damn person in the country was watching us because it was SEC on CBS 3:30 slot. And if you got that slot, that's because it was two damn good football teams and a bunch of dogs going at it for about 3 hours. So it's going to be sad not having it anymore, but I wanted to hit on that because 2001 was a long time ago. It doesn't seem it, but that's 22 years. That's a damn good run. But sadly, it's coming to an end.
I'm with you. I am completely with you. I bet a lot of our listeners and viewers are as well. I mean, I'm the same thing. Growing up, listening to that was the start of a very nerve-wracking 3 hours for me. as a
anxiety's
young, up. As a young Georgia fan, but it was also so amazing. And I don't know whoever started that music, whatever producer was like, all right, this is what we're going to do. He deserves a plaque, deserves a building named after him somewhere. But I hope ESPN does something like that, gives us something specific, something new that we can work with and not like a Taylor Swift song to open it up because that's probably what they're going to do, knock on wood, that they don't. But it is something that's going to end, and it's sad. It is. I kind of sweat every time I hear about that because it's about nostalgia, baby. It's about that feeling you get. All right. And that gives it to you, man. That's like a good walk-up song. It's like a good pregame, sitting in the locker room, getting taped up song. You know what I mean? Get those juices.
It is like 100%. And again, I cannot harp on this enough. Like when it came out that we had a 3:30 game, like everyone's ears and eyes perked up way more than a night game because we're like the whole country's watching us. You know what I mean? Because it was like that time of the day. It's like, like no matter, what you're doing in your free time on the weekends, like your attention span is still locked in enough to know whatever 3:30 slot is going on CBS it's the game of the week, not just for CBS, but it's the game of the week for college football. And, it's going to be sad to see, but
R.I.P. R.I.P. Beautiful jingle. I'm going to add that to the end of the show. I don't know if I'm going to get copyrighted, but I'm going to add that as the outro music for us on this episode, just because I need.
You can play it at my funeral.
Yeah, heard that. Heard that all the Dog Nation's invited to Artie's funeral, which hopefully won't happen soon, and we'll play SEC on CBS.
Down the road.
Let's speaking of the national scene, even SEC specifically, a little coaching carousel happening. It's all happening. You had Zach Arnett out at Mississippi State after 85% of a year, following Mike Leach, RIP to Mike Leach. But that is an incredible job to have to take over there, especially for the program built for the offense that Mike Leach was so good at running. And then, of course, Jimbo, the money man, Fisher, out at A&M. We've been talking about it since he took the job, basically, about his buyout, what it would be. He has a number 1 recruiting class 2 years ago. I think they're ranked 13th in this cycle. And he does so many transfers, guys going out of the program, and obviously the product on the field hasn't been to the level of what he's paid. I don't know who else we're going to expect to jump out here in the SEC. What do you think on that, Artie?
Didn't Pittman get next or not yet?
I don't think it's not yet. Not yet. There was rumors that after this game, I believe. I don't know who they face. Who they face this week. Let's see. But I heard the rumors that after this game, there was a report on it. He was asked about it, said he wasn't, so there hasn't been anything official unless it's just happened in the last 45 minutes I've been sitting here with you.
Yeah, look, I think it's a cautionary tale, and I think it would behoove athletic directors and board of regents or board of directors or whoever, or whatever the term is for that particular school, and school presidents to be like, yes, football is important and it is the moneymaker, but do not give your coach the bag, or don't give your coach national championship type money until they
national
win.
Championship plaque with it was blank.
Yeah.
Remember that? They gave Jimbo Fisher. If you don't know, they gave Jimbo Fisher a plaque blank with a national championship on it.
Yeah, it just says 2-0 and then insert year. And I mean, let's be honest, Kirby made it to a national championship the second year, didn't win, but they didn't give him his that kind of FU money until he won one, right? And I think that's probably the way it should be, right? The reason why people can, bitch and complain about Dabo Sweeney but hey, he's built up his, credibility. You know what I mean? He built that thing from scratch, and he was an interim head coach, took that thing over, and now he makes that real-time money. But if you're going to invest that much money guaranteed into a coach who, albeit he has won a national championship and is an unproven commodity, it just to me, it just never made sense. And now you're going to put yourself as an administration behind the 8 ball, because whoever comes in next for that job, albeit a lucrative job, because of the talent base, because of the existing talent, and because of the NIL money, it's well, if you're going to pay this chump that you just fired $70 million guaranteed, I want $70 million guaranteed. You know what I mean? So I think you've crippled yourself, and that's kind of an ongoing theme, I think, in college football, and it would behoove athletic directors and administrators to be let's pump the brakes a little bit, right? Let's start being smarter with these contracts and these buyouts, because it's freaking insane. What do you think?
No, I'm with you completely, and I think the key there is, I was going to add to you if you didn't say it, was NIL money. And that is such a huge part of this, like it or not.
Such a huge.
Right? That wasn't there 3 years ago, but hey, it's here now, and it's a very large part of it. And you look at that A&M, and that is exactly why A&M is such a good job. Dude, I knew he's a resident Bama alum, so give him some credit. But he said, hot take, A&M's not a great job. I was like, dude, the amount of talent in that state, one, the amount of NIL base you have, two, is enough. And plus the football following, just for fan base, the stadium, everything. That is just, the first two are enough to make it one of the best jobs in America. That I think that's goes without saying almost, because of the money they put into it, the players that they got. And it wasn't like A&M put an amazing product on the field, had a great year, and then they got the number 1 class by a mile, which was a record at the time before Alabama eclipsed it the next year. Surprising. It wasn't like it worked its way up to that. No, it was weird, right? All that money went to recruiting that one year, and you could see it. And then they've dropped off since then. And that's how it explains how big of a deal it is. So I think these coaches are going to consider all these options now. And if you think, speaking from a Georgia perspective, gonna have some assistants leaving probably pretty soon. Glenn Schumann he's right there, man. I think the right job opens for him, and somebody's going to take a chance on him. I think it would be in the SEC. I'm guessing, unless who knows? It could be like an Oregon Dan Lanning situation, but not many programs like Oregon have an opportunity like that. But Dan Lanning was in the same position as Schumann is right now, and then Schumann's put what?
No. I want to finish your thought, and I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you a question about Oregon real quick.
Yeah, no, I think I expect a Georgia assistant probably to leave. I would say I would probably play 60% of what I got on the Georgia assistant leaving for a head job, and I think it is Glenn Schumann. And he's done a couple of interviews the last 2 years, and I think he keeps on producing those linebackers, co-defensive coordinator as well, a top 10 defense on the regular. I think it's going to happen.
So I agree with you 100%. I think Muschamp is damn happy where he is. They're going to give him, X% raise. I think Bobo's going to get a fat raise after this.
His son, Mike Bobo's son, and Will Muschamp has 2 sons for Georgia.
Oh yeah,
at Georgia right now.
Fun fact: the week I went on my first visit at UGA, Mike Bobo's wife had given birth to triplets 2 weeks prior. They have 5 children within 5 years. That's a fun fact for Mike Bobo. God bless him. God bless his wife, Lainey. She's a hero. Anyway, back to college football. Oregon. Dan Lanning said outright, he goes, "I'm not leaving, going anywhere." And people were like, they started saying like, why wouldn't you go to Texas A&M, NIL money, this and that. I don't understand why people don't think Oregon is a destination job. Like, because of now it's the dynamics are going to change in the Big Ten. There's no doubt. But I mean, from a player's perspective, like all of us, like East Coast dudes and Southeast dudes, we always thought Oregon was kind of like the sexy school because of the Nike relationship.
Yep. That is it, man. Phil Knight is your donor. You have that donor base. That's like having an A&M out west. I think the only difference for me would be I think recruiting, just the area, right? Even though there are good recruits around there and Oregon pulls in good recruits because they are Oregon and they have, like you said, the Nike base, the NIL is a big part of that. But I just think maybe the recruiting pool itself, because you can get 3 stars in Texas that are dudes, just like you're closer to the Southeast as well. Not many people want to travel all the way from Georgia, Florida, and Texas, those big time places for football and stuff, to go to Oregon. I think that's the only thing I see, but I'm with you on that.
But people just dismiss him like, oh, he's gone. You know what I mean? And let's be very clear. Like the last head coaches that left for other jobs, one, Mario Cristobal went back to his alma mater. Like I think can be an exception to the rule. And Chip Kelly left for the NFL. The other guys just, got fired. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think Schumann's got one. I think there's 2 jobs he would take to leave Oregon. I don't know what's going on with these balloons. This is
more
insane.
Balloons up on Artie's screen. What is going on with that, brother? My brother in Christ, you're having issues, man.
I don't know. I just think that, in my opinion, man, Oregon's a great job. And I think ultimately, when he says I'm not going anywhere, that tells me one thing, that his agent is in deep talks for an extension. And it's going to be there's probably a serious amount of capital that's getting dedicated to NIL that he can help, the recruiting. And 2, he's about to get a fat raise. Because if I were him, I wouldn't want to leave yet for A&M because I think the SEC is so talented. It's like, I'd rather be going into the Big Ten than taking a new team starting over with the SEC, with Oklahoma and Texas joining.
Yeah, and you got A&M just a whole dumpster fire with how Jimbo was let go, the talks that he was supposed to be let go 3 years ago, all this stuff. I think that's just not a good situation. And I like Oregon. It's a great place to play as well. But games to watch here. We'll end it. Michigan at Maryland. Kind of like Maryland, have a good passing game. To his little brother, throwing the rock around. Maybe something happens there. Louisville at Miami. Miami's playing teams pretty tough, right? They got talent there. They just haven't put it all together, pretty undisciplined. But Louisville, I think they're a pretender. North Carolina at Clemson. Clemson's a tough team. North Carolina's 24 now, back in the top 25, I believe. They did lose to Georgia Tech. I think Clemson's one of those tough teams. We know they have talent, right? And they're starting to put it together here at the end of the season. Washington at Oregon State, probably at least the marquee matchup for the weekend. Washington, we'll see how good they are. Oregon State has 2 losses. I'm not a big believer in them. I think Washington takes care of business. Artie, appreciate you joining the show, man. Georgia, Tennessee, 3:30 SEC on CBS. The last regular season game, Georgia will be in that 3:30 times slot on CBS. And Pulse Sports Network on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, we're there as well. We appreciate you guys following on and watching us this year and listening, of course. I'm at JC Shelton _ Artie's at A Lynch 1788 on Twitter. Hit us up there and let you know what you think of the show in the comments. Georgia rolls this Saturday against the Vols. We called it. See you.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.